But there was an even more heretical branch of physics that began to grow in momentum mid-century. One that went a bit farther than Wheeler, although he did actively entertain it at times. This is the notoriously murky field of parapsychology, or the study of mind-matter interactions.
The mind is no longer limited by the parameters of the body. The person's consciousness and awareness is able to transcend space and time and describe what is going on hundreds or thousands of miles away, or hours or days in the future.
If you believe the findings of parapsychology, maybe the mind is collapsing Schrödinger's wave equation. Despite the modern stigma around studying this stuff now, it was popping up at many elite universities across the United States. Duke, Stanford, Washington University at St. Louis, even Princeton, all had vital parapsychology departments. A friend of mine who will remain anonymous, but now runs a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund, happened to help run that lab at Princeton. It was called the Princeton Engineering Anomalous Research Lab, and he was an expert in one of its staple experiments, the random event generator. Take a well-calibrated device that produces binary outputs based on conventionally thought of as random processes in quantum mechanics. For example, radioactive isotope decay, photon interference, electron tunneling. All of these things have a known statistical distribution.
And so if you imagine something like, imagine you have a wheel that's spinning. It's like a roulette wheel, let's call it. You either have a black marker or a white marker. And so this wheel, it's spinning, spinning, spinning. When the radioactive particle decays, it stops the wheel.
So basically, you've created this perfect digital coin flip. By tying a digital coin flip to a random quantum mechanical process, we are guaranteeing even distribution between ones and zeros over a long enough timescale. Finally, you bring an observer present to see the ones and zeros output on the screen.
Hey, Jesse, how you doing?
Good, how are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Come on in.
All right, let's do it.
The observer comes in with an intention. They're trying to skew the output on the screen towards either ones or zeros.
I can see you're already trying to influence, aren't you?
Yeah, should we all try?
Ready?
You'd expect the observer not to matter at all, for the output to be evenly distributed between ones and zeros with an expected standard deviation, no matter who is present, when or where the experiment is done. But my friend, who helped run this Princeton lab, has a ton of corroborated evidence showing that there is a skewing effect, and that an observer who comes in with the intention of ones, or another observer with the intention of zeros, can often achieve a skewing towards those outputs in a statistically significant way.
To the extent that one can summarize, what we find is that the human mind and the information processing machines seem to be entering into some sort of a dialogue which influences both the machine and the human mind that is interacting with it.
These experimental trials are very well run, and they adhere to strict scientific protocols. And trust me, I've thrown the kitchen sink of skepticism at it with him. Survivorship bias, p-hacking, file drawer issues, all your typical issues with experimental protocols and data. He has pretty solid responses to all of these.
If you look at it as a sort of a social process in science, like if you look at it as a social political process where establishment means that a large cohort of people agree with you, I would say it was never established. It was always very rejected. If you say established means, did you run a well-controlled experiment that got a result at the level, or multiple well-controlled experiments that got a result at the level that, for example, would allow them to say that a new particle exists in physics or something like that, then absolutely.
I did do an episode with him, and maybe when the world is ready, I'll drop it. But for now, I should just say that this is a bridge too far for a lot of people in science. It's an epistemological paradigm shift, not a scientific paradigm shift. It says that the intention and internal state of the observer matters for what's observed. The implications of this are literally impossible to list, but they include and are not limited to an allowance for all sorts of air pockets of different consensus realities. This might explain UFOs, the Mandela effect, and a whole host of other anomalies we experience in our everyday lives that we explain away because we're told that those experiences are fake or can't happen. The crazy thing I've found about random event generators is that there are very few people who've studied them who don't come out believing that there is some sort of mind-matter effect. Even Erwin Schrödinger himself, who again developed the famous wave equation, said that measuring a particle in its present state could affect its past, clearly entertaining parapsychological or parapsychological adjacent ideas. Perhaps one of the better compendiums of parapsychological data is Courtney M. Bloch's Encyclopedia of Parapsychology. But the Rhine Institute from Duke, the Paralab at Princeton, and Dean Radin's IONS also have good data on random event generators. The reason random event generators aren't taken seriously, even if they show paradigm-shifting, mind-blowing effects with their results alone, is that we can't figure out some clear causal mechanism, or turn the mind-matter interaction into math, or instrumentalize it into any sort of useful technology.
I think the existing paradigm it serves some purpose, but I think we are in the Stone Age. I think the philosophical toolbox that we're using to enact our existing scientific method is way behind where it would have to be to ever account for this stuff.
But that doesn't mean the effect doesn't exist. It just means we're in the Stone Age on it, and it's likely pointing to a new paradigm. For another example of this in the past, take Mercury's orbit. Newtonian math couldn't describe it. We needed to understand the space-time curvature effect of the sun, and for that, we needed Einstein's relativity. Or take black-body radiation, an object that absorbs all electromagnetic radiation and reflects none of it. This was discovered in the 1860s by Gustav Kirchhoff, but back then it was an anomaly. Theoretically, an object that only absorbed light would exponentially heat up and create an ultraviolet catastrophe, a cataclysmic explosion. We needed Max Planck's work in 1900 around quanta to understand why this doesn't happen mathematically. Random event generators in parapsychology are like this. The effects are real, we just can't turn them into math.
And it was not a subject that I had any background in from a scholarly standpoint.
The guy that started the Princeton Parapsychology Lab was a plasma physicist and propulsions engineer named Bob Jahn. In fact, Bob Jahn was even the dean of Princeton engineering before starting PAIR. And a lot of his plasma propulsion systems are still used in space.
This guy basically threw away his career in order to pursue this. I'll also say that naively he didn't expect that it was going to be received as sort of atrociously as it was. I think he thought, well, as long as I do good experiments that are well controlled, it'll be treated like everything else in science. So he was sort of, with his age and everything else, kind of coming from a time period where a lot of the early quantum experimental people were just before him. He's kind of coming out of this mindset of reality is this wide open thing, there's a lot to explore and find, and he thought that he was just kind of finding and exploring a new topic like that. It's going to be received that way.
Bob was ahead of his time, and in his book, Margins of Reality, he discusses a model of consciousness in which waves coming from the mind help collapse the wave function. Modern scientist Rupert Sheldrake fully agrees. In fact, that's how he thinks vision works in general.
When light comes in, changes happen in the mind, in the brain, and then the images are projected out. So my image of you is exactly where it seems to be. It's in 3D in full color, but it's located right where you're sitting. And it overlaps with you, as it were. And so everything I see is projected out of my mind, so my mind is extended beyond my brain, filling the whole world around me.
Well, if you think about Penrose's model, he discusses the space-time superposition buildup as occurring within the human brain. If there's anything to this, and the idea that our minds are just graphical interfaces, then of course you'd be able to affect random quantum mechanical processes. You aren't literally affecting the material world with your mind. You're just affecting your unique computational rendering of that material world. Your mind is just an interface. But we keep bringing up this idea that the mind is an interface. Do we have any proof of that? Surely for survival, it would make sense that humans would need to be seeing an objective version of reality. Well, that's actually not true at all. Seeing the true nature of reality is not always adaptive for survival. Cognitive psychologist Donald Hoffman shows all of the ways in which perceiving reality actually can hurt chances of survival. Take color. All color is just differentiated by where it sits on the electromagnetic wave spectrum. So why don't we see the wavelengths of light directly? Because it's in a human's advantage to quickly categorize things. It's way more efficient for me to see the color red than a 650 nanometer wavelength, to hear a ringing noise instead of 2000 hertz frequency waves. If you see blood, you react immediately. If you see a bunch of light waves, it might take you a little longer to jump into action. So humans have evolved to see colors and sounds. They aren't intrinsic parts of nature. They are high-level abstractions. They're like application icons on a computer screen. They're simple categorizations that allow us to navigate reality, not the source code underlying it. We don't even know the underlying substrate of what we're seeing, and my reality might be very different from your reality.